Good morning, everyone. You could find yourself a comfortable seat. I'm Glenn Gagan. I'm your session chair for today. This is my first time up here, and it's not my con, and I'm more nervous than usual. But less about me, and I'd like to introduce our first speaker here in the Surfers Paradise track, Trinity McNicol from University of the Sunshine Coast. She'll be speaking about the shiny factor, how to sell data governance in your organisation. Now, Trinity is from the University of the Sunshine Coast, and as the senior lead of privacy, records and data governance, Trinity is responsible for the boring compliance side of managing corporate data at the University of the Sunshine Coast. And as a poacher turned gamekeeper myself, I can relate to the double quotes around the boring. She's passionate about reframing these functions as enabling capabilities that empower organisations to leverage the value of their data to support strategic objectives and drive decision making. So if you could please welcome Trinity to the stage.
Alrighty. Thanks for having me, guys. I know having a data governance, or like to say cyber adjacent person at a cyber conference is always good fun. So I really appreciate you skipping out on the other great sessions to come to mine today. I just wanted to do a quick little acknowledgement of country. So I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're on here meeting today and pay my respects to the local Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging. So as mentioned, I am Trinity McNicol. I'm the Senior Lead of Privacy Records and Data Governance at the University of the Sunshine Coast. And that mouthful means that I am responsible for, as was stated, the boring stuff when it comes to data compliance. So I'm on the other side when we have threats and data breach incidents. I'm the one who helps make sure that we're taking care of things like notifications, that we know what data's been impacted, we know what our legislative requirements are, and we're meeting all of that to keep our organisations safe. And data governance is a big part of how we can achieve that. So today, to talk to you about how to make data governance something shiny in our organisations, when there's so much exciting stuff going on in this digital landscape today, I'm going to tell you about what data governance is, how you can identify business drivers that are going to be relevant for your organisation, and how you get buy-in. So essentially this is really, how do we make something that is seen as kind of a boring compliance function into something much more exciting or shiny? So first up, what is data governance? Who here has heard the term and has a good understanding of it? Can I get a raise of hands? Awesome, I'm seeing quite a lot of hands there, so that's great. So this may be a recap for a lot of you guys. Data governance is the fundamental approach that we have that incorporates principles, good practices, roles and responsibilities to ensure that we're effectively managing data throughout its life cycle. It helps us to ensure that we're getting quality, consistent data that we can trust. So think about the analytics teams who are using data to drive insights and support decision-making, underpin our organisational strategic directions. They need data that they can rely on. Likewise, as cyber professionals, we need to understand what data we have and where it is to be able to protect it, don't we? It also provides us with the governance and oversight that we need to provide assurance that our data is being used appropriately, responsibly, and ethically. I've got a few benefits on the slides. Not meant to be an exhaustive list today, so please jump on ChatGPT or Google and find some other benefits that might work for your organisation, but these are some I commonly like to cite. So benefits of data governance can include improving visibility of our organisational data assets, improving data quality and integrity. As I mentioned, the data geeks, the analysts, they're going to love that stuff, and also enhancing data risk management and compliance. That's a big one that executives love to hear. Okay, I'm now going to have a bit of a focus on some of the key components for data governance. So I've got some outlined here. Again, this list isn't exhaustive. You can jump on Google, you can jump on ChatGPT and find more components or elements of a good data governance approach that will work for your organisation, but these are ones that I always come back to. So first up, you want to have that foundation established. Policies, procedures, frameworks helps us do that. It helps us set out what are the roles, the responsibilities, the processes, the principles, the practices that we need to have in our organisation to ensure that we've got an embedded approach to data governance, and something that we can cite as a control document of why people across the organisation need to do this and need to adhere to what we're saying. Going on to roles and responsibilities, you might have heard terms like data owners, data custodians, data stewards. These are the roles that help ensure that distributed approach across the organisation to governance. You might hear terms when we're talking different roles and responsibilities and models for that, like a federated approach, a centralised approach, or maybe something hybrid or hybrid distributed. There's always going to be different ways to slice this. You need to figure out what's fit for your organisation. They're all different. In the university sector, I've found that a hybrid distributed approach often works quite well because you've got that distribution of responsibility out into the relevant business areas, but you've got that centralised support and centralised processing of controls to make sure that things are happening as they should be. When you're thinking roles and responsibilities, don't forget about the people who are using your data either. You need to have them factored in. They've got a role to play in this too, and you need to make sure that your policies and procedures are outlining the role and responsibilities that everyone has in the organisation. Moving along to processes and controls, there's quite a lot that we can do in this space. There is an element of this being seen as, the bureaucracy, the red tape. I really encourage you to find a way to reframe this as a supporting and enabling thing that we do to ensure that responsible oversight, appropriate use, and also to support people to get access in a timely manner to the data that they need to do what they're doing. So again, going back to my example of analysts, I use that a lot. I work with analysts because I report to a CDO. The analysts really want to know, well, what data is in the university? How can I get access to it? Who needs to approve that? And is the use I'm proposing in line with what's appropriate for the organisation under the privacy legislation and why we've collected this from individuals, all sorts of things. So if we set up processes that are efficient, effective, and well embedded in the organisation, we can reframe these things to be more than a checkbox activity and actually something that adds value to the users across the organisation. In a common train with that, I'm going to touch on culture and capability. Now, this is something I'm incredibly passionate about when it comes to data governance. We need to promote a data-driven culture and a data-aware culture in our organisations. So that includes uplifting data literacy among everyone in the organisation. When you think about data governance, as I said, it matters to all people who are handling data. It's not just the decision makers. So that is the admin assistant working for one of your members of the executive who might be handling a spreadsheet with some personal information in it. They need to know what they should be doing to be using that data effectively and responsibly. So you do need to embed a base level of data literacy across your organisation. So that's really culture and capability, is that culture piece of, have things like communities of practice and so forth where people can safely collaborate and share ideas, share common challenges and pain points, but also have a bit more of a formal approach, like some mandatory training perhaps for all staff who do handle data, which, let's face it, is going to be everyone unless you're in an organisation where you've got people off on machines somewhere who don't touch data. Formal training, refresher training, have stuff that people can engage with and personalise it so that it's relevant to people's roles and what they do. So you might chunk up different groups or personas of people and figure out what they need to know to embed data governance into their day-to-day activities. Now, if you've been waiting for me to touch on shiny tech stuff, that's really where the catalogue and metadata stuff comes in. There's a lot of amazing platforms at the moment, and I'm not going to spruik or reference any of them. Again, you need to find what's going to fit your organisation. So some kind of ability to catalogue the data that you have and harvest and maintain that metadata about those data sets is absolutely essential, because that becomes your central source of truth in the organisation of what we have, where is it, how's it protected, what's the security around it, who's got the responsibility for it in the decision-making space, like your owners, your custodians. All of that is what's captured in your catalogue and in your metadata. And finally, if we're going to do this and it's worth doing, then it's worth measuring. So establishing some data governance metrics and standards is really, really important, and try and think forward about what you want to do, not just do that at the end. So things like looking at data quality metrics, the availability of your data, who's using it and for what purposes, and how active are your stewards, your custodians? Are they actually going in and looking at who's using what are they doing in the decision-making space, what are they doing engaging with approvals. Actually measure stuff so you can demonstrate that you are adding value to your organisation through these exercises. Now this part, business drivers. This is where I think that we really get the opportunity to think about how we make this shiny and appealing to everyone across our organisation. You can't do this in isolation. This is the why stuff, and it's not about you anymore. It's about why this is going to matter to your organisation, how you can sell it to your executive, how you can sell it to the boots on the ground people working with data every single day. So before you go and put pen to paper and start thinking about that business case to get funding to uplift and start a data governance program, you really need to go out there and start talking to people. Understand from the boots on the ground people, what are their day-to-day challenges? What are they facing when they're dealing with data? Where do they need support? Where do they, are they getting the data that they need? Do they understand where it is to protect it in the cyber teams? Get that level of information. Then go and try and get some insight out of your executives as well. What's keeping them up at night? Is it that they are worried about a data breach? Because increasingly that is a concern for members of our executive. And then how can we support them through data governance with knowing where our data is going to sit so that we can give them some assurance that, hey, we will be able to respond quickly. We will be able to work through that response process. We will be compliant with timelines and so forth that we have to report within. So really, really important to get out there and talk to people. Don't just do this in a vacuum. Again, I keep citing that you can go look some stuff up on ChatGPT, and you absolutely can. These are my favourite business drivers because I find that these hit home for a range of different organisations and a range of different audiences you'll speak to. Cyber and compliance. We're at a cybersecurity conference. I had to say it, didn't I? So again, this really comes down to if we understand where our data assets are sitting, how they're secured, how access is controlled, how we are classifying that data and so forth, we can make sure that we can then build off of what we put in place under data governance for things like DLP and so forth. We also can respond more effectively to a cyber incident because we know this system's been hit, this is the data that might be in scope. We know where those potential risks are as we're still in that very early stage of working through a response process. Strategic decision making. I flagged that I report to a CDO and we have teams of analysts. Our analysts absolutely love knowing what data that they have and how they can use it effectively to support our decision making in the university. So really, really important to have that catalogue of data assets to be able to go, okay, well, I'm trying to answer this question and here's the data I can use to do that. But also understanding that that data is complete, it's accurate, and it's of sufficient quality to actually drive insights that are going to make a difference here. And also that can be trusted, because that's another thing. You send reports through to an executive to the board. They want to know that what you've put on paper actually represents what's real. They want to know that if they make a decision on that, it's actually going to stand up. Finally, one that's coming near and dear to my heart is also about artificial intelligence. So if we want to make sure that when we're deploying AI tools in our organisations, we're not going to accidentally expose things that we shouldn't be. We're not going to have data leakage. We're actually going to have things that we can trust, the good old garbage in, garbage out. Data governance is going to help us get there. It's going to help make sure that we are using those tools in an ethical and responsible way that's also going to be safe and secure. Again, these are just the ones that I like. So what drivers you might have in your organisation may be entirely different, but they're a good place to start. Now, thinking about business drivers as well, I've already touched on this a little bit. You want to talk to both the boots on the ground people, so think about the bottom-up approach, as well as your executives, so top-down. So top-down, you're going to be focusing more on controls, risks, highly structured, what do we need to make sure we've got that assurance in place? Whereas bottom-up, it's often a lot more driven by culture, by capability, by understanding and supporting. So I personally like to do a combined approach. I don't like to be too top-down or too bottom-up. You'll find that your emphasis on one or the other will change organisation to organisation and based on your own organisational culture. So where I am now, we do a little bit more top-down. Where I've been previously, we've done more bottom-up. It really, really depends on where you are and what you need to get those changes over the line and really embed these processes, practices, roles, responsibilities, etc. But very important to think about what's going to be fit for purpose for you. Now, how do you get buy-in? This is always a fun one, isn't it? Because you've got these great ideas, you understand how something like data governance is going to solve all these challenges, all these problems, all these issues in your organisation. But how do you get people on board? It's always the hardest part, isn't it? Because not only will this help support you in obtaining funding, obtaining support to get a program off the ground if you are starting from ground zero, but it's also going to be how you successfully embed this and make it stick long term. If you don't get that buy-in, people aren't going to do it. They're going to find ways around it. We all know those annoying processes that we've got in the organisation where you go, if I could just skirt around it that way, I'll go talk to this person over there. They know how to get me what I need. We want to make sure that we're not ending up in that space when we're doing what we need to do in data governance. So when we're introducing processes, for example, maybe a data sharing agreement, we don't want people just going to their mate over there and going, hey, I know you can give me access to that particular data set I need, can you just send it through? We want them to be engaging with the process because they see value. So something that I like to think about is why is it going to matter to those people and how can I contextualise what I'm trying to do for those different personas or different user groups. So I've got a stakeholders and change little box on the slide there, and I've got 5 W's that we can think of when we're trying to understand how to make this matter to our people in our organisations. So first up, who are your stakeholders? So, we've mentioned the likes of the executive, we've mentioned data analysts, we've mentioned our cyber teams. Think about who those groups are that are relevant in your organisation and build a bit of a persona around them. Then we've got what. What are these people trying to do? So not the data governance stuff anymore. What is their role? How are they working with data? Where are those challenges in their day-to-day work that you can help solve? How can you add value to them? Really, really important to get to that point where you understand enough about what they do to make it matter to them. Because otherwise you're always going to be coming in, telling them what to do. If you can contextualise it for what they do every day, they can see that you've heard, that you're listening and that you're there to support them, and that is so important in these processes. Next up is the when. So when are they hitting these challenges? Again, is it a process that maybe isn't working that we need to look at reconfiguring, reworking? Is it data quality issues that they're finding when they're doing analysis and getting an output that isn't in line with what they're expecting? When are those challenges being hit? Where? Now I've flagged 2 different things for the where question. Where are they working as far as systems and that sort of thing, like in that digital space? But also where are they within the business? Because that culture, that organisational consideration, again, is so important. So there can be certain teams in your organisation who might have a more resistant or more sceptical culture to responsible use of data and data governance. So being able to identify, well, where are those teams that maybe I do need to sit down and have more targeted conversations with? That can be absolutely key to managing resistance to change and successfully embedding what you're trying to achieve in the organisation. So yes, not only the tech side of things, not only where are they interacting with systems, but also where are they sitting in the business. So important. Finally, why? Why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they, again, the analysts, they're doing it because they're trying to generate insights. The EA who works for a member of your executive team, they're doing it because they need to support their boss and their boss is on their case asking them to get this thing done. The cyber guys, they're doing it to keep our systems, our infrastructure, all of that safe. What matters to them? Because understanding that, a lot like back to the what, that's how you really frame where the value is to that individual person or that team. Also, another thing that's really important is try and engage with people who adopt early and show interest in this. Try and get some champions on board because word of mouth is really, really useful. to use when you're trying to embed this and create culture change in your organisations. If you can have people who are early adopters who get out there and say, I see value in this, I've gone through this process and here's what it's given me, here's how I feel supported, here's how it's made my life easier, they're going to tell that to the next person who's then going to come through you and engage with your processes or ask for more information about how they can be supported and what they're trying to do as you're standing these things up. They're going to go look at your data governance platform and engage with it and see what data there is, maybe start looking at how they can address some data quality issues that are in their organisational area. They're going to be a bit more proactive because their friend in the workplace told them. It wasn't just you as the person who's coming in and telling them that they need to change, it's someone that they trust. So those champions, don't undervalue how important they can be for your success. Now, I couldn't do a presentation with talking about stakeholder management and implementing some kind of organisational change, because let's face it, data governance is, if we're starting from pretty well ground zero, without talking about change management. I like to joke that I'm a bit of a closeted change manager. I've never worked as a change manager, but I definitely buy into the principles that it puts forward. And what I really like is it's focused on the people side of change and the psychology. So a lot of what I've talked about actually does align with a structured change management approach. I'm particularly fond of the ADCAR model, which is what I've got up on the slides here today. So starting with awareness. You know how I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, get out there and start talking to people and understand why this stuff matters to them and where their challenges are? That's your awareness. That's when you're getting out there and saying, hey, look, we want to do something in the data governance space, but we want to do it in a way that's going to support you. So you're making it real for them. You're getting them engaged so early on so that they know what's coming. It's not going to give them a surprise later on when you force it on them. Desire is the next one. Again, that's where that why comes in. Why are they doing what they're doing and what are their challenges? If you can contextualise the reasons why they need to get on board with data governance, the processes, the practices, everything you're introducing, you can make it matter to them in a way that they actually want this change. They're not seeing it as a change done to them, they're seeing it as a change that they're along on the journey for because it's going to matter to them. Next up, we've got knowledge. So this is where things like having Q&A sessions is really important. Tell them about why we're doing this thing as an organisation. Tell them a little bit about what it's going to look like and a little bit about how it's going to impact them. So again, they know something's coming. Next up is a really important one, and that's ability. That's where you start getting into your hands-on persona-based kind of training. You tell them, okay, I'm going to take the example of a data sharing process. If you do data sharing agreements in your organisation, you as someone who wants to get access to data to use for a specific purpose, this is what you're going to need to do, and walk them through the process. Make sure that they understand, that they know how to engage with it, and they know what happens next. Okay, it's going to take X period of time for that to be reviewed, Y period of time for an approval. We might have some back and forth in the middle there, and then that's what happens after the approval comes through. Make sure they're armed and capable of doing what you're going to be asking them to do, because otherwise, again, you will be met with resistance to that change because they will see it as something that's being forced on them that they're not capable of yet engaging with. They don't understand how to do it, so they're going to try and avoid doing it. And finally, the fun one, reinforcement. So I try and get ahead of this one wherever I can throughout the process by really understanding the people that I'm engaging with. Because reinforcement is really about how do you make it stick long term? How do you bring those later adopters on the journey? How do you correct any narrative that might be coming out of, it's just bureaucracy, it's just red tape, we don't want to engage with this, it's getting in our way. How do you turn that around? And how do you make it so that this stays put once you've introduced it? Because I'm sure if you all sit there and think, you can think about times where there's been organisational change, something's been introduced in your organisation, and it hasn't stuck around. It's kind of fizzled out when people have taken the foot off the gas. We want to make sure that we are proactive in keeping this embedded, keeping this front of people's mind, and keeping them engaged. Because otherwise, you've done all that work for nothing, haven't you? And no one wants to do work and see it go to waste. Okay, now finally, We've done everything, we've engaged with people, we've understood what fits for our organisation, we've found the why, we've found the business drivers, we got that business case approved, we got our funding and we've done it. How do we make it stick? Something that I'm very passionate about in this space, don't just lift and shift. So this goes back to the making it relevant for your organisation. There are a lot of brilliant data governance frameworks, guidance, organisations who are already doing it their own way out there that you could copy. But I can tell you that if you just try and take something that's an off-the-shelf or someone else has done before and make it fit in the organisation you're in, square peg, round hole. It's not going to work. You need to contextualise it to where you find yourself to make it matter and make it stick. Bringing everyone along on the journey. I've talked a lot today about people and far less about data governance, which probably was a bit of a surprise for some of you today. You need to make sure that you've got people engaged. You need to make sure that you understand how this is going to matter to them, how it's going to bring value to their roles, how it's going to provide them with assurance, manage risks that they're worried about, and just generally make their lives easier. If you do that and you constantly engage with people, you are going to find that they're a lot more willing to come along on that journey with you. And a really, really big one that I like to flag is plan to operationalise. Anything worth doing is worth operationalising. Someone far wiser than me said that to me once, and I couldn't agree more. I'm losing my voice, which I like to do in presentations. So absolutely think about the long-term goal. When you're putting your business case together, don't just think about the 1 year, the 3 year, the 5 year plan. Think about what this looks like when you take yourself out of the equation as the driver. How is this going to stay in your organisation for good? How is this going to continue to evolve and mature as you need it to in your organisation? How are you going to make sure that you've got the BAU resources to support things like those centralised processes you might have put in place? How are you going to support new people coming into data governance roles who need to understand what they're responsible for, like your onboarding, your inductions, your training? Who's going to be doing that? Who's going to be reviewing your materials, uplifting your policies and procedures? What cycle is that going to be on? Who's going to be doing those metrics, those reporting pieces to make sure that we are demonstrating the value of what we've done on an ongoing basis, not just under a program? Thinking about operationalisation and planning for it and being very deliberate about it is absolutely key to making this just something that we all do and making sure that it sticks around for good. Okay, that's the end of the formal part of my presentation, but I did want to leave ample time for Q&A today because I'm sure there's a lot that you might want to pick my brain about. But I do have a QR code up on the slides here. If you are keen to keep chatting about all things data governance and people in data governance, please do hit me up because I am incredibly passionate about this and love talking to people.
Awesome. First up, a quick round of applause for Trinity. Thank you very much for that. Now, we're actually taking questions through the app, so if you could pull up the app and push it through to the Q&A. While everyone has to think about that, I had a couple of primer ones. I've tested the app. It seemed to work. You can upvote me if you want, but I'm here now. You mentioned business drivers, and one of the key ones is obviously a breach.
Yes.
How much, because we've been talking about this internally in my organisation, how much value is there in prep work for the comms around that, both internally and externally, to know how to communicate with your people? I think it was highlighted by the Optus situation that their people were really struggling and suffering under the weight of what had happened. So if you could give us some insights on that, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. So yes, part of effective breach management, understand what your approach is going to be to comms. That's going to be internally in your organisation, managing who needs to know what and when. So have your teams planned out, have your other interested parties well understood. That should all be outlined in whatever your breach plan is. When we're starting to talk external comms, you've got your regulators that you need to think about, as well as your individuals who have been impacted when we're talking personal data breach. Regulators, don't just think of the standard. Whatever your organisation is, you may have other regulators that are relevant beyond the likes of the OIC, OIC Queensland and so forth, whichever state you're in. You may have international regulators that you need to consider. So if you're in scope of things like the GDPR, you may actually have reporting obligations globally as well. Some people do get caught about the extraterritorial application of those privacy and data protection acts that are out there. So definitely think about the regulator piece, but beyond just the privacy and data protection regulation. Or with your individuals, who are affected, make sure that you understand what they're going to be feeling. Because the biggest thing that a lot of people say that they feel is uncertain or fear when they receive some kind of notification. The other piece is also about timely notification. Really, really important. The other complaint you always hear is, I didn't know anything soon enough. I didn't know what to do to protect myself, but I didn't hear anything soon enough and I didn't feel supported. So there is definitely a burden that comes with making sure that you do those comms nice and early and upfront. Have things drafted that you can just copy, paste, take out paragraphs, etc., based on the nature of the breach. Okay, so it's a breach of, your address and personal contact information. Great, you've got a pro forma paragraph you can just put into that notification. It was your financial or banking information. You've got that there ready to go, and you can just tailor to the particular incident. So that's going to help alleviate a lot of the stress internally associated with preparing those comms and mean that you can get something out proactively. And also take responsibility for it. Happens to everyone, but take responsibility and show that you care, that it's having an impact on your people.
Yeah, and also manage the inputs, I guess, to the teams as well. Much like DR, you need to make sure you're not overwhelming people trying to deal with the incident.
Absolutely. Yep.
Oh, we've got a flurry coming through now. So we have one from Gerhard here, which is what level in the organisation have you generally placed data governance forums at, and how many stakeholders are involved?
Forums, are we talking like committees? Are we talking like information forums? What are we talking about there? Someone might want to give me a bit more clarity on what they're coming out with that question. I think we're going to try and get you a mic because I heard some of that, but not all of it.
So forgive me while I bed in.
Yeah, it was more around if people want to attend forums to sort of identify integrity or security issues, sort of what layer within the organisation would you have those at, and what stakeholders would you have there?
To be honest, I do a lot of engagement at all the levels really throughout the organisation, but I pitch it accordingly. So if we're starting to talk things like, discussions of privacy risks, I will have a combination of people who are decision makers and advisors in that space within the organisation. If we're talking things like, day-to-day quality issues and how it matters to, e.g. your analyst teams, having a community of practice for maybe data analytics is a really useful place. But you've got to make sure that if those more informal groups are coming up with problems, ideating solutions, etc., that there is a conduit for that to go into, feeding through to the decision makers, feeding through and driving improvements in the business, because you don't want these things just to be conversations in a bubble, and it's also really frustrating to those people who have those great ideas. You want them to be enabled and heard so that they can be acted on, because it's great insight and you don't want to waste it. But yeah, presentations right through to executive or board level, depending on the structure of the organisation, absolutely essential, but those things are also going to be short, sweet, to the point, and based on the forum that you're going into.
We have a question from Tim. For a major data governance uplift, how long of a time frame would you plan for on outreach and comms? Because it can feel never-ending.
Outreach and comms from the very beginning to the very end, and then into BAU. Time frame for programs will vary on the organisation, so I won't comment, but you can't do this stuff overnight. Several years is quite common to really get a good uplift in this space. But yeah, comms is throughout, so the ADCAR model I had on slide with awareness, etc. You're planning awareness very early on, and then little updates throughout. When you're moving into things like your training, so under the ability stage, that's going to be more towards when you're rolling out certain initiatives that you need to actually get people on board with, so that will come later in the piece.
And we have another one from here from David. Where organisations have significantly different data governance approaches across business units, is there a strategy to consolidate those that you've had success with?
Look, personally, I haven't had to deal with that too much. I've had a little bit where you've got isolated pockets of really good activities happening, but it's generally still very ad hoc and it needed to be formalised. So most of the situations I've been in, we have used a more hybrid distributed model. However, in other sectors, a more federated model can actually work. So I think understanding your organisation and understanding what that model of responsibility actually is going to be that's most appropriate for you. So maybe they can keep doing their thing over there if it's really good, as long as you can have some alignment across the board. Also, engage with them early. If they're doing things that are really positive, get some ideas from what they're doing and why it's working, how it's providing value for them, how it's fixing their problems, because you might be able to take learnings away from what they're doing and apply it to the bigger organisational approach, and also keep them engaged as your champions, who are those early adopters who can get out with the rest of the organisation and say, this matters to me, this has worked for me because.
I think you've talked about the people a lot, and
Yes.
Often we fleshware objects are the source of blame, but also I think the greatest weapon and the biggest solution. And we've got quite a positive one to end on here from Timothy, which is, do you have a favourite experience or success story where a change approach has really reduced resistance?
Absolutely. I really love the stories where you've had someone completely against what you're trying to do, even sometimes to the point of trying to sneakily disrail it on the side, and where you can engage and turn that around and create a champion out of that person. So I had quite a senior member of the organisation that I was in before. They actually held one of the data governance roles where they needed to be very actively engaged. So they were responsible for approvals in a particular process that we had, and they just never dealt with it. They never did anything. These approvals would come through and they would ignore it. Which obviously created bottlenecks there because we needed to get their approval to process it. So what I did is we've got a problem, this person doesn't want to engage. I went and sat down with them, I went and talked through, well, what are your concerns? What's the challenge here? Why are you not being, proactive about it? Because obviously there's a reason this is not working for you, or you don't understand the importance of it, or what have you. Where's the disconnect? And so talking through and genuinely wanting to listen to that person and understand what their concerns and what their issues were helped me to reframe that and have the conversation around, well, actually, this is going to give you better visibility of people out in the rest of the organisation who are using your data to understand and have that oversight and assurance that that's actually appropriate. And when they finally understood that, hey, there was value in it for them, it's really not that hard to have a scan read over the thing and click approve. We did actually get them on board, which was fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your tips and advice with us today, and I'd like everyone to give Trinity a big round of applause, please.